All right, man, peace. So now this is going to be part two pertaining to the situation between NBA superstar LeBron James and the political pundit from Fox News, Miss Laura Ingraham. Of course, Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman are going to talk about it. They're also going to touch on the racial incident involving the hockey player, Mr. Devontae Smith-Pelly, in which he was taunted with basketball. Of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
This is SportsCenter right now. I'm Will Reed. First Take will be back in just a minute. Each February, the NHL unveils a month-long initiative to highlight and promote diversity and inclusion in the league and the sport called Hockey is for Everyone. But this weekend, 4 fans at the United Center in Chicago were ejected for directing racially charged language at Capitals forward Devontae Smith-Pelly as he sat in the penalty box.
And look at the Caucasian man there. Devontae Smith-Pelly decided to approach him, and he has this look on his face as if, "What are you talking about, guy? That wasn't me. I don't even know what basketball is."
A Capitals spokesperson confirmed the fans were chanting basketball, basketball, basketball.
It's sad. I mean, that 2018 we're still talking about the same thing.
No, I don't think it's sad. I think it's just circumstantial. When the so-called black man starts to understand that it's he himself who needs to be recalibrated and be readjusted and start to accept reality rather than trying to recalibrate others, then you won't see situations as sad anymore. You'll just see them as matter of fact. It's not sad when a lion hunts down a gazelle and kills it. That's just a part of life. When you're taunted in a certain way, especially when you're a participant in a sport where you're a severe minority. And when I say minority, I'm not talking about racially. I'm talking about in regards to demographics. It's just a fact that the so-called black man is a severe minority in the sport of hockey. And once again, I'm not talking about racially. The term minority can also be implied to mean less than. He's not less than. He just happens to represent a smaller amount percentage-wise in regards to the racial disparity in that sport. You are going to be confronted with quote-unquote racism. And that's just a part of it that you have to take. Like they said, you must accept the good with the bad. If you want to skate around with the majority of those players who are going to be European and Canadian, you know that they're going to say something to you. You know that the fans are going to say something to you. The good part about hockey is that you could throw down on the ice. If people want to continue to talk that type of shit, okay, then I guess we're going to find out what's what. That's just how you have to deal with it. But this defense mechanism that many so-called black people use, where they give you the year as if that's supposed to change something. Well, it's 2018 and they're still saying this, or it's 2017 and they're still saying this. Like, that's old and that's hackneyed. It's very clear that you have to recalibrate yourself rather than worrying about recalibrating or, reconstituting the thought processes of others. Let them be them. Once they see that you're no longer worried about gaining their validation, they're going to have to think of something else, or they're going to gain more respect for you because they're going to say, wow, you no longer care about what I think about you. I'm impressed.
Over and over. It's sad that, athletes like myself 30, 40 years ago were standing in the same spot saying the same thing.
Well, if you've been saying the same thing for 30 to 40 years, that means that the last 30 or 40 years, you've been doing the wrong thing because nothing has really changed. That's according to you. You're asserting that. If you're still experiencing the same phenomenon, that means that your tactics over the last 30 or 40 years have not been as impressive, as effective as you would have liked them to be.
You'd think there'd be some sort of change or progression, but we're still working towards it, I guess, and we're going to keep working towards it.
Good luck.
NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman called the fans' behavior reprehensible. More First Take right now.
We will definitely not shut up and dribble. I would definitely not do that. I mean too much to society. I mean too much to the youth. I mean too much to to so many kids that feel like they don't have a way out, and they need someone to help lead them out of the situation they're in.
Let me say this about LeBron James. He does mean a lot to society from a pop cultural perspective. Yes, he does. Even if you want to go economic, the so-called black athlete, as I've stated in the past, is a $1 billion contributor to the American economy. But when we're talking about actual development, actual spiritual advancement, societal advancement, no, LeBron, you're not important. You're only important if you truly understand the fabric of this society and how it works and what actually is going to accrue a certain level of esteem for so-called black people. And you can't be as concerned as the average modern day liberal black is with the other races and have a mindset that's going to result in effectual change for so-called black people. That's only going to come when so-called blacks stop being concerned with the other races' opinions of them. And LeBron James is heavily concerned with the other race's opinion of him because he is a liberal black. He's woke. All right? To be woke is like a mix of pro-black and liberal black. They want to talk all the blackity black shit, but they also want the white man to come give them a hug. That's a self-defeating ideology. That's a self-defeating belief system.
All right, we need to get into this. So earlier in the show, we were talking about the back and forth between LeBron and Fox's Laura Ingraham, most notably her egregious statement that James should just shut up and dribble.
I don't think that it was egregious. I think it was just crass. I agree. I think that if you're not informed, that you should just be quiet and stick to what you're good at. You branch out and you start to develop other things as you gain an expertise in that thing. Seeing as LeBron James is a very notable figure in this society, he has a lot of acclaim, a lot of prestige. He should take it upon himself to say, let me educate myself in these different fields that I want to partake in so that I don't make an ass of myself. Just because you have the ability to do something does not mean that you should. Just because you have a platform and a microphone doesn't mean that you should grab that mic and yell into it. No. Anybody can try to get attention or garner attention for themselves, but do you actually have something to say that's going to enliven someone? What really was he doing by saying that Trump is a bum? Is that supposed to get him impeached? Is that supposed to do what? Oh, well, you know, you're dividing the people. The people in America have already been divided long before Donald Trump. Stop trying to blame him for your own low self-esteem.
As you just heard, that wasn't the only disturbing incident from the weekend, as Devontae Smith-Pelly of the Washington Capitals was a victim of racism.
No, he wasn't a victim of racism. He was a recipient of it. He was a recipient of it. He wasn't a victim of it. There's a big difference. He was a recipient of it.
In Chicago. Will Kane with us now. Will, good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Good.
If he was a victim of racism, then that would be, say, maybe his general manager saying, I don't want him on my team because he's a nigger, so we're cutting him. Then he would have been a victim. He was a recipient of racism. A bunch of low-level cave people yelling basketball. Who gives a fuck? Fuck them.
Good morning. You bet.
I want to start with you. How should white Americans feel about this? We want to flip the script here.
What an asinine question. But once again, it's normal race mongering by ESPN, the woke network. This is why this show is starting to go down the drain.
Well, look, I'm not dismissing your question, Molly. I truly am not. But I don't speak for white Americans. And I don't know who does.
That's a good answer, Will Kane. That shows that you have an understanding that they're trying to cast you in a two-dimensional way so that you can play the quote-unquote prototypical white guy and Stephen A gets to play the quote-unquote prototypical black guy. Stephen A is a frustrated political pundit. And he's a two-dimensional thinker who doesn't truly understand the nuance of what's going on in this society. That's what makes him perfect as a boule Negro, which is just basically a high-level Negro who's there to cause a distraction.
And to some extent, I'm even bothered by the question.
You should be.
So I'm going to respond to you with a question just quickly, but I want to say this. We're not monoliths. Anybody that's ever watched this show knows, for example, Max Kellerman and Will Kane have extremely different worldviews despite the similarity in the color of our skin. So I don't know why anyone would say there's some unifying voice or unifying response that someone would have based upon the color of their skin.
Will, before you
Good answer, Will Kane.
You go on.
Yeah.
Let me acknowledge that I'm the one that instigated this question.
Big surprise.
But I want you to understand. I want you to understand the premise from which it comes from. What I want is a level of understanding.
Well, here's the problem, Stephen A. It's very, very difficult for you to claim that you want a level of understanding when you're crafting a question that is clearly meant to elicit a certain type of response so that you can cast Will Kane in a certain role. And therefore you can play off of him to glorify yourself. Because clearly if Will Kane is supposed to speak for all white people, you're trying to cast yourself as the representative of all black people, and you're not qualified to do that, sir. And this is the problem with Stephen A. Smith. He's dealing with delusions of grandeur. He gets his head pumped up so much by a lot of other, no disrespect, a lot of other two-dimensional, low-level thinking Negroes who soup his head up and say, yeah, Steve, we need you to talk about this. We need you to talk about that. Stephen A. Smith is a sports columnist. He's not mentally acute enough to talk about the issues that so-called black people need to have spoken about. And he doesn't have enough scope to detail the nuance about the fact that different so-called black people have different motivations. Not everybody wants a hug, man. Not everybody wants that hug that a lot of other so-called black people want. So Stephen A. is speaking from that perspective of, I'm going to represent all so-called black people because they all should want what I want, which is that hug from the Caucasian. It's just that I'm closer to getting it than they are because I'm in the boule. And kudos to Will Kane for not allowing himself to get typecast like that.
Meaning that I know of black individuals who have said, we're tired of seeing us as black folks being the ones to have to talk about these issues or have to talk about issues of race because we know how we feel. We want to hear how you feel. That's where the question is coming from. Well,
in other words, where the question is coming from is that you're trying to force that mystical, magical conversation with the quote-unquote white man that's going to alleviate your anxiety. That's why many of these liberal woke blacks are always talking about how we need to sit down and have a conversation with the white man, because they feel like the solution to their self-image and their self-esteem problems are going to come from the Caucasian. Everything with these woke liberal blacks always is so dependent on the Caucasian and this interaction with them. Why is that? Because they were put under Martin Luther King programming. That Luciferian, everybody hold hands, Marxist programming, where in order for us to be happy, we have to get the white man to like us and treat us quote unquote equally. Because it's not good enough to solve the issues amongst ourselves and to have a fellowship with our own, which we're nowhere near having. We're farther away from having any type of unity amongst the so-called black man and woman in America than we are with the Caucasian. So talk about putting the cart before the horse. But this is good for a segment on TV. It's always good to go to race and politics, especially in a dead week like you have after the NBA All-Star break. So you'll always see topics like this, normally about race or about who's greater, LeBron or Jordan, or where's LeBron going. LeBron is the gift that keeps on giving to the sports media.
Okay, and I'm not dismissing it, Stephen A. Okay. I want to have an honest conversation. But here, the reason I say that, Stephen A., is not to be like, here's the thing. I think we look at superficial dividers in society today as too primary in our worldview. It's the main filter. You know, I hear you do this often, Stephen A., and you and I are friends and we respect each other, but I really begrudge when you do this, when you say, as a black man. You know what? When I listen to you, Stephen A., I don't listen to you as a black man. I listen to you as an individual with whom I respect.
And that's the appropriate way to look at him. Because despite what Stephen A. thinks, he is not intellectually qualified to speak for so-called black people. And the reason why he uses that introduction of as a black man is because he's cognizant of the fact that he has to couch all of his statements behind that facade so that, you know, many of the so-called black people who watch his show think that he's quote unquote repping for the cause. And Stephen A. Smith is far too compromised to rep for any cause. As he states incessantly, he's a proud capitalist. Anybody who's a proud capitalist cannot rep for the cause of people who are quote unquote disenfranchised or who perceive themselves to be disenfranchised. Because at the end of the day, he's going to side with the money. Just like your homegirl Jamel Hill, just like your homeboy Michael Smith, and anybody else on TV in a suit and tie who talks shit all day but is really not about what they claim to be about.
Who I don't categorize via the color of his skin, nor his political things.
But I think you have a different experience, a different life experience based on.
But the point is,
your race.
Well, you can say that he has a different life experience based on his race, which is most likely true, but it's not incumbent upon him to capitulate to that typecasting either way. It's just not. Like if you speak to a person who grew up in an affluent environment, who's quote unquote rich, and you can say, okay, speak for all the rich people. They're not going to speak for the rich people. They're only going to speak for themselves. Now, they may speak from the perspective of trying to maintain or preserve their position in society. That's a whole other topic. That's a whole other subtopic. Speaking for your position in society. Now, you can make the case that Will Cain, as a so-called Caucasian, is in an affluent position in contrast to the average so-called black man. But that's not his fault. Once again, they're in their rulership. If the so-called black man wants to be in the position that Will Cain is in, that doesn't mean that you have to appeal to Will Cain. That means that you have to look at and study how these people came into power and try to utilize those same tactics. It's not the job of the conqueror to give you the keys to their kingdom. I don't know why, but you know what? I shouldn't say I don't know why. I do know why so-called black people can't grasp that, or at least the vast majority of them. It's because they want that hug.
That's fair, Molly. It is, Molly. It's not to do this kumbaya BS about the world is colorblind. I'm not advocating this colorblindness stuff. I'm not saying that we're ignorant of our differences. We acknowledge them. The question is how primary. Now, Stephen A., I can answer the question as an individual who one of his characteristics happens to be white. The hockey incident, the Chicago Blackhawks. Look, it's vile. It's reductionary. It treats human beings as, it's the thing I'm railing against as we speak. You've reduced this person into simply the color of his skin. And if I'm sitting in those stands, I shout those guys down, those 4 individuals down. I advocate for them to be thrown out.
Allegedly, you would do that. Allegedly.
I don't want to ever have that lead to questions like the one I'm asking today. All I'm pushing back on, Stephen A., in the end, is this idea that somehow you are a monolith with black America, and I am a monolith with white America, when the goal truly is that we're individuals and have differences within that individuality.
Yeah. Will, if you don't mind, I'd like to say something about this, because I do think that in this question, you can treat white Americans as a monolith. That doesn't mean there's unanimity there. But I will say this about the
That's good that you state that, or that you allege that, Mr. Max Kellerman, because as I've stated numerous times on this channel, since you want to cast everyone under the same umbrella, when and if the time comes where so-called Caucasians are held accountable for the actions that are often impugned upon them by many of the more pseudo-militant aspects of the so-called black community, that means that you're going to be held accountable and culpable as well, and you should not have any disputation about that. You should be willing to come out your pockets and give up all that money. That's what I've always stated, especially to a lot of so-called black people who get confounded by the liberal Caucasian, and their ramblings about how, black people should be upset and they should want to be reimbursed, and how slavery is the great American sin and all that other shit. Okay, empty your bank account then to the first disenfranchised Negro that you come across. Give up all your goods. Put your money where your mouth is.
The election, the last election, and it was really LeBron talking about Trump. So when we ask how white Americans should feel about it, if I may, I'd just like to say a few things, and maybe you'll have a response and we can get into this. The election broke down along racial lines. Every single group of white people voted for Trump more than they did Hillary. Every single group voted for Trump, including white women. Everyone voted for Trump, right? Now, who were white? It was white identity politics. That's a fair thing to say. Now,
well, that's a credible thing to imply, but the problem is that the person that Trump was running against was also Caucasian. So I think a lot more went into it than just what you're alleging. It's kind of hard to say the reason why Trump won was because he appealed to white identity, and the person that he was running against was a Caucasian woman who has stated in the past that young black men are super predators. That's what Hillary Rodham Clinton said. So it's clear that super liberals like Max Kellerman are still having a hard time wrapping their brains around how Donald Trump won. The real reason why Donald Trump won is because for the first time in a long time, the conservative Caucasian aspect of America felt like they were dealing with a politician who was able to really convince them that he was concerned about their concerns. That's pretty much all it was to it. They look at Hillary Rodham Clinton as a plutocrat, as an elite. And even though Trump is certainly of that ilk and of that class, he was able to successfully convince them that he was actually concerned about their concerns. It was much more of a societal thing than a purely racial thing. The race issue is an aspect because you do have a segment of conservative Caucasian men who feel like they have not been listened to, especially over the previous 8 years with Obama in office. Sure. But to act as if that was the prime mover, no, I don't believe that. I think that the super liberal media are still trying to grasp at straws as to why, their mother goddess figure, Hillary Rodham Clinton, was not successful. And LeBron James, no disrespect, he's a simpleton when it comes to politics. Any man who would stomp and stamp for Hillary Clinton to become the president shows you that he's a corporate whore. And he was given orders by Nike to do so. That's why he got involved with that. Sorry, but LeBron James is not a leader. He's not a leader off the court in regards to political associations and what people should do in regards to the future of their society. He's a Luciferian and a globalist. He wants everybody to come together, and he's also an opportunist. He's done great things for his community in regards to his philanthropy, and that's where it should stay. That's where it should end, because that's what he's qualified to do.
Now, there were certain subgroups of white people who voted for him in higher percentage. For example, if you were male, older, and uneducated, those things correlated with more votes for Trump, right? But every group voted for Trump, so it's fair to say that white people voted as a monolith. That doesn't mean that there weren't white people, for example, me, who were part of a multiracial coalition. That doesn't mean that there aren't white people, for example, you, who maybe didn't feel good about voting for Trump and maybe didn't cast their vote for him or for Hillary or whatever, right?
Well, how about the so-called blacks like Stephen A. Smith, who most likely voted for Donald Trump but want to get on TV and play the racial political association card, where he wants to appeal to many of the liberal blacks who watch First Take by acting as if he's incensed by Donald Trump, even though he most likely voted for Donald Trump. People like him and Charles Barkley and Shaq.
Right? But it does mean that if you can say every group of white...
Allegedly, they voted for him. All right, let me throw that allegedly in there. But if I had to bet money, if I was a betting man, Stephen A. Smith voted for Donald Trump. And let me say this, I would have no problem with it. I know a lot of simple-ass Negroes would say, oh, how could you say that? Well, I just said it. I would never in my life, number one, vote. But if I had to vote, I would never, ever vote for Hillary Clinton. I don't understand how you could vote for a woman to rule over you. That tells me a lot about you.
White people voted for a certain candidate, and that candidate was dog whistling to white people, and not really hardly disguised, then it's fair to say that that's identity politics. So how should white people feel about it? I think those who voted for Trump, who are having misgivings at this point...
Yeah, but how many people who actually voted for Trump are having misgivings? He stated before he was elected/selected that he was going to build a wall. He stated that he was going to come after foreign terrorists. Those are the things that he's done that have caused the liberal media to go into a tizzy. Basically, all he's done is what he said he was going to do. These other things about Russian collusion have proven to be mostly groundless and baseless. These are just facts. I'm not into politics. All right, I just watch the game that gets played. A lot of black people allow themselves to get emotionally triggered by a lot of dumb shit and bullshit. That's not going to change no matter who's in the presidential office.
And are listening to someone like LeBron James echo the sentiment that is echoed by many. For example, New York Times, which is a credible news source, just as the Wall Street Journal is. I'm not talking about the op-ed section. I mean the news section. Just did a survey of 171 political scientists ranking all the presidents. Trump ranked dead last. Dead last. So for those people who, and you look at the polls, the lowest in history at this point in the presidency, who are having misgivings about Trump and are white, how should those people feel about it who voted for him? They should maybe examine their own motivation and ask themselves some tough questions.
Well, maybe you should ask yourself the same questions. You're stating that there was a poll in which Donald Trump came out as the worst president in U.S. history. I can think of some presidents who were advocates of slavery. I could think of some presidents like Woodrow Wilson who had the Ku Klux Klan come down to the White House. I could think of presidents like Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon who made statements about so-called black people that are on record. People like George Bush Sr., who was the head of the CIA and involved with drug smuggling. I mean, we can go on and on and on and on. Am I saying that Trump is better than them? No. I'm just saying he's in that room with them. Birds of a feather flock together. They're all wicked as hell, and they're all just basically just executives under the worldwide corporation. They have a job to do. There are no good men in that office. They're just men there.
About whether a call to identity politics along racial lines worked on them, and whether that's the kind of person they are. I think that's a legitimate claim to make.
Well, I also would think that it's a legitimate claim to make that if you were an advocate of someone like a Hillary Clinton, you're most likely a mangina. You're most likely someone who is also an advocate for homosexuality, transgenderism, because we know that that's certainly what she represents as well. Allegedly. All right. These are many of her platforms, that she stands behind transgender or transgenderism, as well as the homosexual/lesbian movement, female empowerment over men. So I have to wonder about a man who would be an advocate for those type of platforms. Right? And that's what LeBron James associated himself with. So what really is he saying? No disrespect to him, but not much at all. Once again, the brother should stick to his philanthropy and how he helps out his community. He does a great job there. He's not Muhammad Ali. He needs to stop trying.
Go ahead, Will. He was talking to you?
Well, okay. I want to hear your point of view, Stephen A. I guess what I would say is this, Max. In the end, I'd like to clarify what the hell we're talking about. Are we talking about four buffoons in the stands at the Chicago Blackhawks game? Are we talking about Laura Ingraham and what she says on Fox News? Are we talking about the way people vote? See, here's the thing. You get messy, and you get messy fast. And this was what happens when you
look
play
at the Chiron, Will. Look at what it says in the lower third.
Max, let him speak, Max. Let him speak. Let him speak, Max.
Up and dribble. That's what we're talking about.
Go ahead.
When you play, and by the way, identity politics is a game that's being played on all sides of the political spectrum.
Agreed. That was what I stated. Identity politics is something that gets played by both so-called Democrats and so-called Republicans. Hillary Rodham Clinton is playing identity politics when she tries to appeal to so-called black people, when she goes on hip-hop radio stations and acts like she knows how to bop her head to rap music, when she identifies herself with the women's marches, and when she shakes hands with homosexual advocates and transsexuals. She's playing identity politics. When Donald Trump decided that he was going to act as if he's listening to the concerns of the conservative Caucasians who mostly inhabit Middle America and who dot the coastlines of America as well, then he was just paying attention to his constituency. But to say that would corroborate a sentiment that the Caucasian is a monolith politically, or that that one Caucasian should be qualified to answer the question of where should or how should white Americans feel about a statement towards LeBron James. I mean, that's just silly. It's asinine. And it's an attempt to, as Will Cain put it, reduce the conversation into a polarity where Stephen A. Smith could stand for one side and Will Cain is supposed to be cast on the other side. And that's not fair to someone who's actually sincere. Stephen A. Smith is not sincere. He's just trying to build up some type of credibility with the so-called black community.
And it's one that I reject coming from any side. In the end, so the Chicago Blackhawks, Stephen A., it should be shouted down as individuals of any race. Laura Ingraham, I disagree with what Laura Ingraham had to say. It's the opposite of how I view the world. It's the opposite of how I want to conduct, for example, the Will Cain show.
Allegedly, that's the opposite of how you view the world. Allegedly.
Which is don't shut up and dribble. Everyone bring your points of view, and nobody will be protected. You will be battled, and you'll be proven wrong.
Well, that's my point. I would like to see LeBron James go on her show, since he claims to be so devout in his beliefs, whatever they are. That.
By the way, I heard you on this one, that she was certainly marginalizing LeBron James. I don't think she was marginalizing him based upon race.
I agree with Will Cain there. And I stated that in part one. I don't believe that Laura Ingraham was marginalizing LeBron James based on race primarily. Now, of course, you have connotations. Whenever you use the term basketball or dribble a ball, either the intended target is going to correlate your statements with a certain racial aspect, or other people will try to hype up the situation by alleging that there is a racial component involved. But the concept of the dumb jock transcends race, and it goes back to junior high school. Whether it was people on the basketball team or the football team, what was always implied was that they were not the sharpest knives in the drawer. It's not necessarily a racial correlation. And to be quite frank with you, LeBron James did not do much to help himself being taken seriously as a political commentator with the level of his comment. His statement was juvenile. Donald Trump is a bum and he doesn't give a fuck about the people. It's like, I don't think that you understand what the political process is about. And to be quite frank with you, as I've stated before about LeBron, he clearly has delusions of grandeur. In my opinion, he suffers with bouts of female energy. He just has way too much female energy. And that stops him from being able to evaluate situations pragmatically. And he's also a willing pawn of the corporations. The main corporation that he's a pawn of is Nike, which has put a battery in his back and many of the other woke black athletes' backs, like Kevin Durant and Serena Williams, to push and promote quote-unquote equality, which we know is Marxist and is really only intended to push and promote black people wanting to get that hug from the Caucasian, wanting to get validated by the Caucasian. That's why you see Serena Williams claims to be so pro-blackity black, but she's with a Caucasian man. It's very, very common for many of the liberal / pro-blacks to live their lives according to a massive level of hypocrisy that they're not even aware of. They're so self-absorbed and they're so caught up in their Luciferian world that they don't see the disconnect between what they claim they're about and what they're actually living. So to make a long story short, no, I don't believe that Laura Ingraham is off base with her statement that he should shut up and dribble. I really think that that's a call for LeBron James to step his game up, so that if he's going to step into that political world, that he's ready, that his sword is sharpened as it should be. If you're going to be a leader, you must have a sharp sword.
I think she was marginalizing him based upon profession.
I didn't say she was marginalizing him based on race. I said that people from different ethnic backgrounds may take it differently, and she has an obligation to be sensitive to that because...
Well, no, sir, I don't think that she has an obligation to be sensitive to that. I think that her role on Fox News is actually to be a shit starter, what they call a firebrand. And as a firebrand, you cannot be worried about the sensibilities of others. I think that she understands her demographic very well, and her demographic wants her to be bold and to speak in a way in which they feel like she is a mouthpiece for them. You can't go through life, especially in this modern day time, overly concerned about how people are going to take your comments. Everyone gets offended by everything, so you might as well say how you really feel, say what you really perceive, and it is what it is. You take it how you take it. This is why all of my comments, I normally will say allegedly when it's something that I perceive or something that is not on paper as exactly this is what happened, boom, 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 boom. The way that my brain works, I'm able to correlate things together and paint a picture in regards to what's going to happen or what is happening. And I've learned to trust my brain. But everybody can't see what I see. So I say alleged. It's really not that difficult to figure out, to me, if you just pay attention.
Because if they hear it differently than you or I heard it, she holds some culpability in that regard.
No, she doesn't hold any culpability. People hear things differently all the time. It doesn't mean that someone's at fault. As a matter of fact, I admire someone who sticks to their guns. Say what you mean and mean what you say.
That's point number one. Point number two, and more importantly, when you talk about, how you don't speak for all white people and you don't like it when I say as a black man. I've said this to many white folks before, and I'll say it to you right now. And I don't mean it in an insulting fashion. I'm just giving you an education about something here. It is my belief, and that of a plethora of folks emanating from the African American community, that white folks come to work every day with a job to do. We come with a responsibility. I am on the airwaves.
Well, Here's the thing with that, Stephen A. Smith. And I understand when you work in the Caucasian man's corporate America, you feel like there's a heavy burden on you, but that's a burden that many black people have self-imposed. The real burden that so-called black people have is to tear down the barriers and the walls amongst each other. But because our people are more concerned about pleasing the Caucasian and being validated in their workplace, in their corporate setup, that has created a dynamic where you feel like you should be compelled to outdo your Caucasian coworkers because you have to show them, I can do what you do. I can do it better. Everything revolves around proving something to the Caucasian, as opposed to showing yourself and showing your own, look what we can do. So many of these hang-ups are self-imposed. That's why I state that our people, they have a very, very low self-esteem. They have very bad self-image problems.
You have the license, Will Kane, to sit up there and say, I'm going to tell you how I feel. I don't speak for us. I don't speak for white folks. I don't know anybody who does, etc., etc. But I am telling you right now, it's a sports-related item in this particular instance. It could be anything else. And the black community is, make sure you say this. Make sure you say that.
Right, but that's a you problem, Stephen A. That's a you problem. You have to tell them, I'm going to say what I know to be true. It's not my responsibility to act as a mouthpiece for you when I know that your brain is not functioning properly. Many of our people's brains are not functioning properly, especially the ones who have the ability to dictate to you what they want you to say on television, because we already know what their motivation is. For the majority of the quote unquote cognoscenti of the black community, they want to hold hands with the Caucasian. They want that hug. I say that over and over again because it's the truth. So I already know what type of battery they're putting in your back. If somebody tells me, you make sure you say this, you make sure you say that, I'm going to tell them, you make sure that you remember who you are and who I am. You have your thoughts, I have mine. And we can build amongst each other so that you can have an understanding of what I'm going to say. But you're not qualified to tell me what I better remember. No, sir.
You got to address this. This is the end you have to attack. Hold on, Max. You had your turn. Hold on for a second. So you got to, it was one of those situations where people are looking at black folks because of the paucity of African Americans in a position to have a voice. And they're looking for you as an African American to step up and speak on
Let me say this. This stuff about black people not having a voice, that was relevant before the age of social media. Now everybody has a voice. Everybody has a voice on social media. I couldn't have set up a channel 10 years ago. Or pardon me, well, YouTube came out in 2005. I couldn't have set up a channel 20 years ago. I can set up one now. Everybody can set up a channel. It's just a matter of, do you actually have something to say that people want to hear or that they're interested in hearing? So, no. The time for playing the woe is me, nobody listens to me card, that's at an end, so-called black man. It's time for you to take the bull by the horns and take control of your own life and your own destiny to the best of your ability. Now, as I always state, we're behind enemy lines. So yes, there are going to be dynamics that are going to be there to try to shortchange you, to try to cut you off at the ankles, so on and so forth. But you have to keep moving forward. That's all that we can do. Playing the victim role is not going to get you anywhere. Anywhere. All it's going to do is get you typecast as a pathetic figure. Your woman is not going to respect you, and none of the other races is going to respect you. That's why I make my videos targeting the so-called black man. And for a lot of cats who listen to my videos, especially those of you who are 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, you have to make sure that you sit down and you know what you want to do with your life. Because by the time you get to be 23, 24, 25, and you still have not made any concrete decisions, and you have a child on the way, life is going to come at you very, very fast. And the people who you thought were in your corner, some of them are going to turn against you. You always have to prepare for the worst possible outcomes so that in the event that those things occur, you know what to do right away. That's what life is really about, man. Life is not about looking at the so-called white man and talking about how they need to do this and they need to do that. The so-called white man's not going to do shit for you. They're not. And you shouldn't expect them to, because to me, it's not manly to want to give another man praise and credit for what you were able to accomplish. Now, in life, we all need help. In the event that you need help and God brings someone into your life to help you, you give them their just desserts. You give them their just credit. But you shouldn't be looking for someone to give credit to. That's not manly. And when people like Stephen A. Smith go on and on and on about how some political pundit, Caucasian woman, should be cognizant of who she's affecting by her comments, all that spells out is the so-called black community is super sensitive about dumb shit. Who cares about what she had to say about LeBron James? Who cares? They make it an issue. Why is that? Because they know that the race talk thing moves the needle. And racism is a very, very real issue. And it's something that the so-called black man and woman and many of the other races have to deal with. But everything has to be handled, in due order, in due time. And that's the only way that it's going to get resolved. The so-called black man has to resolve issues within himself. That's the main thing. Not worrying about the so-called Caucasian and how can I figure out a way to hold his hand and walk up this mountain together. All that dumb shit.
On behalf of the whole. Now, obviously, that's impossible because everybody doesn't feel exactly the same way. But if you take into account history, the kind of things that we have been subjected to, the kind of challenges that we inherently are forced to have to overcome, strive to overcome every single day of our lives, there is this belief emanating from our community that you have to recognize those challenges, be sensitive to it, and speak with that mind, with that thought process in your mind, rather. You have to be cognizant to that. That is not something a white individual has to be concerned about.
That's not true. You're not qualified to speak for what a white individual has to be cognizant of. You're not qualified to do that, Stephen A. Smith. You're barely qualified to speak from the platform that you're trying to speak from. That at being an ambassador for the so-called black community. You're not even qualified to be an ambassador for the so-called black community. So how could you state what a Caucasian man is expected to represent? What nullifies your statement and truly disproves it is the fact that, according to Max Kellerman, Donald Trump was selected/elected for presidency because of racial identity politics. So clearly, there was an outstanding percentage of Caucasian men, according to Max Kellerman, who resonated and exuded a certain amount of racial pride due to what Donald Trump stated. So maybe they expected him to rep for them. Who knows? I don't necessarily entirely buy the sentiment that the Caucasian should be viewed as a monolith and that one can represent them. But when it comes time for judgment, yes, people are going to be judged according to their nation. That happens all the time. Our nation was judged according to our conduct as well as our nationhood. So it's going to happen to everyone else.
Will Cain could come on national TV and speak for Will Cain. And the white community is not going to hold you accountable for what you do or don't feel. But as a black person, if you don't sit up there and at least echo, not to necessarily say you're obligated to agree, but if you don't at least echo a sentiment, then you don't. It's the belief is you don't relate to history and what history has taught us, and your community is going to have a problem with you.
Well, look, let me say this. Just the fact that Stephen A. Smith claims that you have to echo a certain sentiment, he's asserting that the so-called black community exercises groupthink, which is partially true. And that's one of the main reasons why I have this channel, to encourage brothers to exercise three-dimensional thinking and not conform to the baser aspects of the so-called black community. Like they say, you're only as strong as your weakest link. You're also only as intelligent as the weakest brain in your group. Please keep that in mind. You're only as intelligent as the weakest brain in your group, because the weakest link, the weakest brain is going to pull everyone down. So if Stephen A. Smith feels that he's compelled to echo the sentiments of the so-called black community, that basically means that he's saying that he's a puppet. Those are his words, not mine. But anyway, they barely talked about LeBron in this whole segment. In regards to the LeBron-Laura Ingraham issue, I think that LeBron should sharpen up his tools and go on her show. It would be a good exercise for him. Either an exercise in diversifying his portfolio as a public figure, or an exercise in futility. We'll see. But anyway, peace.